Our next speaker is Wizzie Brown, a senior extension program specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service for 22 years. She works to educate others. Is that right? 22? They didn't put the years on it, but I assume. She works to educate others about insects and integrated pest management and hopefully succeeds in teaching that insects have their place in our world. Wizzie is a board certified entomologist specializing in urban and structural pest management, but also covers landscapes, gardens, native pollinators, insect identification, as well as other topics. She received her Bachelor of Science in Entomology from Ohio State University and a Master of Science in Entomology from Texas A&M. So welcome, Wizzie.
So thank you everyone for inviting me. I love to talk to people about bugs, especially those people that like to hear about bugs. So I'm going to be talking about pollinators today. And usually when people talk about pollinators, they automatically go to the managed pollinators. So they're thinking of the honeybees, and those aren't necessarily native insects. I mean, they're excellent pollinators. They're very efficient at what they do. But I'm trying to turn things to having us look at the other stuff that doesn't get as much recognition. So some of the orders that we're dealing with, Linda. Some of the insect orders that we're dealing with, of course, are Hymenoptera. So bees, wasps, ants, that just kind of makes sense. Lepidoptera, Coleoptera, and Diptera. And we're going to talk about a few of them and some of these. I mean, I could go on for a very long time about bugs, which some of you might want me to do, some of you not so much. But we're going to start off with the Coleoptera. And these were most likely the first pollinators way back in the Jurassic period. And the flowers that they like tend to be the more open-shaped flowers. If you think about it, that makes sense. Beetles are kind of like big and clunky. They're not great flyers, so they're going to need a big platform that they can actually land on. And usually when the beetles are there, they like flowers that have everything like just out there. You know, they don't like things tucked away. And they are going to be there for the pollen. They're not going in there for the nectar. They're in there eating the pollen. And even though they're eating pollen, they're also a lot of times getting pollen all over their body. And so when they move on to the next flower, they're going to transfer that pollen. They do like heavily, what did I do? Okay, excellent. They do like very strongly scented flowers. They tend to like fruitier smells. And obviously, beetles are going to be around during the day. So it's going to be a flower that is open during the daytime. They are going to, like I said, not be so concerned about the nectar. So it doesn't have to be a flower that produces a lot of nectar for them. They're more, you know, I'm going for protein in the pollen. And with these, the flower colors are generally going to be lighter in color, like a whitish, dullish, creamy, white, yellowish kind of thing. They're not going for like reds or oranges. And I know that the flower that I have there is orange, but if you look at what those two beetles are doing, they're not terribly interested in food at the moment. And that's actually a ladybird beetle right there. So the first beetles that we're going to talk about are the soft-winged flower beetles, and these are in the family Malaridae. They are, and you know, I'm kind of like the opposite of our first speaker. We're kind of bookending you. He's like, don't know what things are, and I'm like, this is what this is. So, you know, hopefully you already have the wonder, and now this is going to be more information that you're like, oh, this is even more fascinating. So with these guys and girls, they are going to have a serrate, so like a serrated knife, antenna, or filiform, and that just means that they're straight. And you can see the jazzy one up there on the left-hand side has like the little floofy things on their antenna, so some of them get a little fancy. You'll see in the next slide the next characteristic, and that is about the procoxy being conical. When we are identifying things as entomologists, we get super persnickety. And the prococci are going to be on the very first pair of legs, and the cocci is actually where they attach it to the body. And so you're actually not identifying it by a photograph, obviously, but you got to flip it over and you look for those conical shaped. The next one is even more ridiculous. When you look at beetles, the tarsi segments, or those are like the tip of the legs, those little tiny segments that we call feet. We actually count those on beetles, which I know this is insane, but and you have to count not just one leg, you have to count all three because there's patterns. And this one has 555 tarsi. There's some that are 545, 544. Some of them are 545, but they look like four. And it's hell when you are trying to identify them. But generally, when I'm looking for malarids, what I am typically looking for, and I'm going to go to the next slide. So you can see the prococci real quick. I kind of put a little circle around it. But what I'm looking for essentially is a brightly colored, small to medium-sized beetle that has those serrate antennae, and it has what I call a snowman-shaped body. So the head is small, it's got a larger thorax, and then the abdomen is large and bulbous. And some of them are absolutely stunning and beautiful, like that one that's on the right-hand side. I mean, they're just gorgeous. And so, if you want some beautiful beetles to look at, look for those. Another beetle that is often overlooked because they are very, very small are the tumbling flower beetles. And these are some of my absolute favorites. And they're one of those that they are so fun to watch. These are in the family Mordelidae, and they, like I said, they are small, tiny to small on these ones. So you really got to be looking for them. They have that convex body shape, and their abdomen actually extends past their elytra or their wings. And that's actually their abdomen that you see sticking out. So their abdomen is pointed, that's not a tail. And the cute thing, if you look at the upper left-hand picture, you can kind of see that convex body shape. And they will tuck their head down, kind of like they're going to do a somersault, and they actually will be rolling around in the flower, and they're just getting pollen all over their body, and they are just being so adorable. Our next order are the Diptera, and I put a real obvious one on the slide here. That is a flower fly. So I think when people think about Dipteran pollinators, that's probably the one that they think about the most. But these are going to be generalist foragers. They're looking for nectar for them. And a lot of them will have hairs on their body, some more so than others. You'll see more hairs on the next one because it's got huge spiky hairs. But these are going to go again for more pale flowers, either like the whitish, like you see in the photo there, or more into the like browny, purpley colors. So that kind of dark color. And the fun ones that I personally really like are the ones that go to the staphylids that smell like rotting meat or dung or, like really kind of putrid scents. Those flowers have developed to be pollinated by flies. And they are usually attracting not flower flies like you see here. They're going to go for more of the floral scents. But the putrid smelling stuff is by the what I call the muscoid flies. So those are the flies that kind of have the housefly shape. So that would be like house flies, blowflies, flush flies, stuff that you normally see around the garbage bin or on your pet waste in the backyard or, funky, nasty areas. They're the ones going to those flowers. Let's see what else. Flowers here, they can be funnel shaped, but if they are, they're going to be more of in the umbel type shape that you see there, where they're little tiny trumpets, because most flies, not all of them, or most dipterans are going to have sponging mouth parts. So it looks like a flat sponge on the bottom, and they can only kind of slurp up liquids. And they can't necessarily get down into those deep trumpet-shaped flowers. So I'm going to talk about two flies. Before I go to this one, I do want to mention, just so, because I get this question all the time and it's kind of random, what good are mosquitoes? I understand, mosquitoes are not fun, but mosquitoes actually feed on nectar in both the male and female forms in the adult stage. That's how they're getting their energy. And with the female mosquito, she is the one that is going to need to also take a blood meal so she can then produce eggs. She needs that protein from the blood meal. And so she is capable of vectoring disease, and they're nasty, and I understand that. But since they do feed on nectar and they have scales all over their body, they're actually pollinators as well. So they do have a good side as well as the bad side. So this is my personal favorite pollinator on the dipteran order. And these are the tachinid flies. These are in the family Tachinidae. I know we get creative with the names there. These are large, very stout, very noticeable flies. And they have big spiky hairs on their body. And they're fantastic. I mean, and not only are they wonderful as pollinators as adults, but they also lay their eggs in other insects. So their larvae are feeding on those insects and killing them. So they're also parasitoids, which is super cool. Our next one is the bee fly, and these are in the family Bombyliidae. This is another super cute insect. Very, very hairy body. They're going to be fuzzy on the head, the thorax, and the abdomen, but they are not bees because all flies only have 2 wings, just in case you haven't taken any of my classes before and don't know that. They are going to have that really elongated soda straw-like mouth part. And so pretty much any flower is accessible to these ones because they can really reach down and get to that nectar where they need to. And for these, again, flies, the beetle tarsal thing was ridiculous. With flies, it's wing venation. And so that's what that whole wing venation stuff is that you see. They have an anal cell that is open, and that means something if you're someone like me, but I don't expect y'all to even try to look at that because looking at fly wing venation for identification is another not fun exercise. Bee flies, while they are great as pollinators, they do have a dark side. And that would be that there are some species that will lay their eggs in solitary ground nesting bee nests, and they will eat them. So not saying with bugs, my idea is you just kind of let them do their thing and keep hands off, and they're gonna work things out on their own. And then, of course, we have our hoverfly, also known as a syrphid fly, also known as a flower fly. And these are going to be in the family Syrphidae. These are often going to be bee and wasp mimics. So they're going to have that yellow and black coloration on their body, but they're only going to have 2 wings. The one on the upper right-hand picture is a little bit different. Some people think that it looks like a little miniature dragonfly, but it's actually a hoverfly. So again, dragonflies are going to have 4 wings. Hoverflies are going to have 2. The big thing with syrphid flies is this spurious vein. Again, wing venation. I know it's ridiculous, but the spurious vein is only found in Syrphidae. And I call it the vein to nowhere because it just kind of pops up and then it just meanders off, and it really serves no purpose. It's just kind of there. I guess it's there for an identifying characteristic. So again, it's one of those things that we don't expect you to really look at, because if you're taking photos of bugs for identification, are you really getting that close and clear of a picture on their wing venation? Probably not. But if you see a fly that looks like a bee or a wasp, but it only has 2 wings, that's going to be your hoverfly. Our next group is the gateway bug. These are the ones that if you hate insects, generally Lepidoptera okay, unless you're Sheldon Cooper, I guess. He was afraid of them. But with Lepidoptera, they're fairly non-threatening. They've got a long siphoning mouth part as adults, and so they can't really do anything to you. But with them, again, very, very long mouth part. It's giant giant soda straw essentially, and it curls up when they are flying around so it's not in the way. So flower shape can essentially be anything for them. Flowers here on color, they're going for nectar, obviously, and flower colors can be white, pink, yellow, orange, red, all of that good stuff. And a lot of times they will use nectar guides as well. So with those nectar guides, those are going to be typically things that we can't see as humans unless you have like really cool eyesight and you can see into the ultraviolet, which would be that would be a cool superpower. So if you can see in the UV, like butterflies and some other insects, then you can actually see those nectar guides. And that's essentially directing them kind of like an air traffic controller, like here's where you want to go. And so they may be finding those nectar guides on those. Typically with Lepidoptera, and I'm saying typically because there's always exceptions to the rule, they are going to be daytime flyers, and so you are going to find them on flowers that are blooming during the day. That being said, we also have moths in Lepidoptera. So when we're looking at the butterflies, they tend to be daytime flyers. Butterflies are going to have knobs on the end of their antennae. Skippers, which are a little bit different, they have hooks, so they're like that. They are going to be related to the Lepidoptera. They're like a type of butterfly. But then the other main group are going to be the moths. And these typically are going to be around at night. So the flowers that they're going to are those ones that are going to start opening kind of in the late afternoon, early evening, and then on into the nighttime. That being said, the one on the left-hand side is an exception to the rule. Those are going to be a lot of our sphinx moths. They're also called sphingids because they're in the family Sphingidae. Some people call them hawk moths. Some people call them hummingbird moths. Some people call them clearwing moths. It just, again, we have lots of names for them. But these are going to be fairly large moths. They have spindle-shaped wings. And I actually was taking video of one on the Carolina jessamine over here earlier today. So there was a sphinx moth flying around. I was trying to get pictures, but that wasn't working very well. Moths are going to typically go again for more dull colored flowers. Again, if you think about those night blooming flowers, they're generally not like really bright and showy. And then here is what the skippers look like. So I said that these ones are the ones that have the hooked antennae. And you can see that they hold their wings a little bit different than those butterflies and the moths do. So while they are a type of butterfly, they're kind of in their own little subgroup. And then moving on to our Hymenoptera. These are going to be our wasps, our solitary bees, and our bumblebees. When you are looking to tell the difference between a wasp and a bee, our wasp stuff is going to be on the left-hand side, our bee stuff is going to be on the right. Wasps are going to feed on nectar as adults, but they have the added bonus of also going out and collecting other insects to feed to their offspring. So you get a twofer there. They are going to have few to no hairs on their body. They tend to have long legs and they have a more elongated body shape. Bees, on the other hand, they are gathering pollen and nectar for them to feed as food to their offspring. And a lot of times they'll make like a little packet with it, depend on our solitary bees usually. Typically stouter bodies, they're more kind of squished together and they are going to be hairy. And this is one of those, we have the southern yellow jacket on the upper left-hand corner there, and those are very small. A lot of people think that those are a lot bigger than they are. Southern yellow jackets only are a half an inch, so they technically are about the same size as a honeybee. And both of those can nest in the ground. I think a lot of things that people must think are honeybees are actually yellow jackets. But if you're getting stung by something, you're probably not inspecting it for hairs. I understand that. So with the bees, they typically are going to carry that pollen, pick it up on the hairs on their body, and they'll either cram it into a pollen structure that is specially made for that. That could be on their legs, that might be on the underside of the abdomen, or there are some that actually have a special, I'm going to say, container in their digestive system called a crop that they use to store that. And then when they get back to wherever they're doing, they'll regurgitate that and then they'll do whatever they need to. Looking at our wasps, the most common ones that people will run into are the yellow jackets, paper wasps, mud daubers, and honey wasps. That being said, there are a whole bunch of different wasps that we have, and they can all be fantastic, not only as pollinators, but also as those predators. The thing is, they also have that capability to sting. So if they are out foraging for food, they're really not going to be problematic because they don't have anything to defend. It's when you get to a social wasp nest, and those would be things like our yellow jackets, and those are going to get very grumpy if you are around their nest because they are protecting their home, they are protecting their offspring, and you would pretty much do the same if you had an intruder breaking into your home. So I understand it. So yellow jackets, like I said, they're fairly small. And there are also the bald-faced hornets. We have those in some parts of Texas. Those are a type of yellow jacket. And with these, they're going to make a chewed wood fiber nest that is actually enclosed. But if you break that open, you can actually see the different layers, and that's where their brood cells are. So they will have a single opening into that nest, and the workers are going to go out and provision that nest with food. But the adults, in the meantime, they need energy so they can continue to do that. So they're also going to be collecting nectar to feed themselves, and that's when they're actually pollinating. The yellow jackets are going to be cavity nesters. So if you see a nest like you see on the upper left-hand corner, that is going to be the bald-faced hornet. Yellow jackets are going to be in old rodent burrows or under tree stumps. Like if there's a cavity space, I've seen them in wall voids, old birdhouses, things like that. The other wasps that make a paper nest are the paper wasps. These ones are also known as red wasps because they are reddish brown. Some of them do have yellow markings on them. They also make that paper-like nest, but theirs is going to be an open-faced single layer. And a big difference between our paper wasps and our yellow jackets, other than the size of the wasp and what they look like, is the numbers that you'll have on a mature colony. Paper wasps are only going to have several hundred individuals, whereas your yellow jackets can have thousands. And those wasps are capable of stinging you more than one time. So you do have to pay attention. Yellow jackets are much more serious, and I would recommend if you need to control them, if the nest is in an area that it's going to hurt someone or cause harm, then you would need to do something. And in that case, I would recommend contacting a pest management professional that has gear to protect themselves. Our other super cool one that also makes a paper nest are the Mexican honey wasps. And these are a native wasp, and they're so cool. These are tiny. A lot of people think that usually it's like a weird housefly, but they're actually a wasp. They have 4 wings. But they have that real pudgy abdomen that is a teardrop shaped. It's black, and then it has those yellow rings at the end of it. Their nest is going to be usually high up in trees, but they do create and provision that nest with honey. And so when you look at their paper nest, it's done in layers. And you can kind of see that in the upper right-hand picture. But those wasps are going to also incorporate tree branches going through that nest to give it structure and hold up that nest because it is holding honey as well. Again, as long as you leave them alone, they're fine. I got stung when I was taking these pictures because I was literally this far away from the nest. So they were not happy with me, but they are really, really great pollinators and just really cool to watch. Our solitary bees, this is a huge category. 90% of our bees are going to be solitary. And that means that they technically live alone, but they may aggregate. So while they don't hang out together as adults on a nest per se, if there's an area in the ground where it's a good place for them to raise their offspring or the next generation, multiple bees will go to that area. They tend to be non-aggressive because they don't have a nest that they're defending. They don't have brood that they're defending, because these are essentially provisioning either a tube in the ground or a tube in a cavity with honey and pollen. They lay an egg on it, they seal it off. When they fill up that space, they seal the whole thing off, and then they move on to the next area. So that is their maternal care. They're not constantly bringing food to feed them. Our first one are going to be the mining bees. These are in the family Andrenidae, and that is the largest bee family. These range in size tiny to large, but they're not especially hairy bees. If you look at the abdomen, they're going to have mostly black, but they'll have some like yellow hair stripes on them. But the main part of their fuzziness is going to be on the head and thorax area. These are a short-tongued bee. You can see that in the bottom right-hand picture. And these are going to be ground nesters. And I say it's a nest, but that's not accurate. It's because I said they're not living there. A nest infers that they're living in that space. It would be more accurate to say that it is a nursery, because that's what they're provisioning and rearing their young. The cool thing about these and our next ones is that they have this waterproof substance that they can exude from their body, and they use that to line the tunnels in the ground. So if it gets overly wet, those tunnels don't flood, and that way their offspring can survive. Very similar to the Andrenids are the coletids. These are the plasterer bees. These are going to be small to large in size, and you can see they have more distinct lines on their abdomen than the Andrenids did. And these, again, they're going to have a short tongue. Often when you look, again, if you look close at them, their tongue is like really, really wide, and it's like a little stubby, wide tongue. So they're not necessarily going to be able to get down into like really deep tubular flowers. Another one that is going to create those nursery areas in the ground, and they will secrete that waterproof substance. Some of my favorites are the sweat bees. These are in the family Halictidae. These go anywhere from tiny to medium in size, and their colors are either black to metallic blues and greens. They're very, very pretty bees, often overlooked because of their size. And with these, they are called sweat bees because a lot of times they will land on you in the summer when you're sweating, and they will collect salt from your sweat. So that's why they get that name, sweat bee. These are going to either create their nursery area in the ground. Some species will create them in rotting logs as well. So if you want to encourage them, you can actually create a habitat by partially burying a log somewhere in your yard. I've done this a couple years ago. It is decaying, and I'm getting all sorts of cool stuff. Don't do it next to your house if you want to do that. Do it somewhere out, because mine has termites. So it is what it is. Termites digest cellulose, so that's what they do. Mason bees are probably one of the most commonly known of our solitary bees. These are also known as orchard bees or blue orchard bees, like you see there on the bottom. Small to medium in size. They do tend to have a stout body, so they're kind of like little linebackers. And they're going to be anywhere from black to metallic blues or greens. And these are going to carry their pollen on the underside of the abdomen. So they have hairs on their abdomen that actually allow them to pack that pollen in. These are gregarious, and they are cavity nesters. So these are one of those bees that you can actually get a bee. People call them bee houses, but again, they're not living there. So it's essentially a bee nursery. You can create those, but if you are doing that, I highly stress that you need to manage them because you don't want to load up on parasites or fungus and cause more harm to that population than good. Another one that's a cavity nester that you often will see in tandem with our mason bees are the leafcutter bees. And with mason bees, if we go back, you can see that they use mud to seal off their nest and seal off the different spaces within that tube. With leafcutter bees, they are going to use plant material. And mason bees are usually some of our first ones out. They should start coming out now at this point. Leafcutter bees are going to be a little bit later. But you can see they cut sections of plant material and they use that to line that cavity. They'll pack their little pollen bread in there, lay an egg on it. They separate that with leaf material and they will essentially fill up that whole entire cavity space with pollen and an egg and pollen and an egg. And when they get to the end, they're going to seal theirs with plant material. And you can see in that one, you actually have both mud from the mason bee as well as plant material from the leafcutter bees. Leafcutter bees, to me, they look like they're squished, like somebody kind of stepped on them. And they just have that really flat abdomen. But they also, if you look at the upper right-hand picture there, you can see they carry that pollen on the underside of the abdomen. And so that gives them kind of a space to pack that in and it rounds that abdomen out more so. A fun one that, again, I find fascinating. These are not as much of a pest as they are in other parts of the United States. My parents, they live in Ohio in a log home, and they get these nesting in the log home, digging tunnels in there, so they aren't really a fan, but anytime I visit and I see them, I'm like, oh, this is fascinating. My mom's just like, Wizzie, you need to stop. But these are very large bees, and you can actually, there's a bunch of these out on the Carolina jessamine, you can see these. So these bees are going to be the large carpenter bees. These are in the family Apidae, which honeybees are also in Apidae, but these are in the genus Xylocopa. And these are large like bumblebees, but if you see what looks like a bumblebee, but it has a shiny hiney, it is a large carpenter bee. So they do not have fuzzy abdomens. It's usually like black or kind of a metallic blue-black color. These are going to create tunnel systems in wood and usually softwood because they're actually chewing into it. They can create like an inch-long tunnel each day. And so they will reuse tunnels if they can find them. If they can't, a lot of times what will happen is you'll have a dominant queen and then subservient queens, and the subservient queens are essentially tasked with chewing new tunnel spaces while the dominant queen will go out and forage and then she comes back and lays eggs. So it's kind of cooperative care at that point, but not true social. For something to be a truly social insect, they have to have overlapping generations, they have to have cooperative care of the young, and they have to have a caste system. So there are specific groups in that colony that have specific jobs to do. We also have small carpenter bees. These are often overlooked because they are very, very tiny, and they're actually pretty common, but they have a slender body, dark in color. Some of them, if you look closely at them, they have like yellowish white markings on their face. But again, you have to get like a really good picture of them to see that. These are going to be cavity nesters, and they can be anywhere from solitary to semi-social, where they would kind of cooperate again. Chimney bees, this is a fun one. They actually will create turrets out of mud, so it looks like little chimneys wherever they're creating those nursery areas. These are large bees, very, very hairy, and they are going to have the brush on their leg like bumblebees do, where they will cram that pollen. But these, bumblebees don't create nursery areas. We'll actually get to those in a few. So chimney bees, very, very hairy, but they do kind of have that striping on there. They're not that like black and yellow like a bumblebee is. They're more of a pale color. Our longhorn bees, these ones look like, and this is what the bottom picture is showing. I touched something again. There's something that I'm touching that it doesn't like me. Longhorn bees, the bottom picture, it looks like somebody like punched the bee in the face and it has like a big swollen area underneath its eyeballs. That is what the clypeus is. And this isn't the only insect that has that, but this is a good characteristic for this particular bee. The other way to determine on longhorn bees is if you find the males, which is what you see in the upper left-hand corner. That's where they get their name. The males have really long antennae, and so they're called longhorn bees. But these are medium-sized, typically yellow and black, usually very hairy. And this is another one that will cram pollen onto its hind legs. This is a type of longhorn bee. So these are our squash bees. And if you grow cucurbits, you probably are very familiar with these. These are the ones that get down into the squash flowers and you see them rolling around being all cute. And sometimes they get like all drunk on the nectar and they fall asleep in there and the flower closes up and then you're like, what's going to happen? They can chew a hole out. It's all good. So it's not going to hurt anything. But yeah, generally small bees, but these are really great and these should be some of your favorites if you're trying to grow squash. Digger bees, ground nesting bees, go figure with that name digger bee. These are a medium-sized bee and these are going to have really wide heads. The heads are going to be essentially as wide as the thorax. Hairy bodies, the abdomen is kind of sometimes sparsely hairy, like you see on the bottom there, but it does have those hairs that kind of create that striping on there. This is another one that is going to carry the pollen on its hind legs. The oil digger bees, these are going to collect floral oils from plants, which is where they get the name. And these are a large bee, stout body. A lot of people will mistake these for bumblebees, but these are, if you look at their eyeballs, that's not a bumblebee. They usually have really bright, colorful eyes, and these are going to nest in the ground as well. And then that brings us to our bumblebees. And these are going to be in the genus Bombus. These are medium to large size bees, very, very hairy, yellow and black. And we'll actually get to bumblebees in a minute, like how to tell the different things. These are going to be a long-tongued bee. You can actually see that tongue going down into the flower. And something that bumblebees do, well, actually, there's two things. They have one that's called nectar robbing, where instead of going down into the flower like you see there, where they're going to pick up pollen somewhere on their body and take that, they'll actually chew into the base of the flower and kind of go around that system. So they're kind of hacking the system there. The other thing that they do is something called buzz pollination, and it's a way that they vibrate their wings that will actually cause more pollen to be released from the flower than other types of bees. And it works really well on certain types of plants. And there's videos that you can find on YouTube that shows it in slow motion, and it's just fascinating because the pollen is just pouring off of the flower. It's amazing. The cool thing about bumblebees is that these are a native bee that are social. They are actually a social bee and they are going to store nectar, but they don't store nectar over winter like honeybees. With honeybees, they are trying to hoard up that nectar so they can survive through those cold winter months when we don't have flowers that can provide food. That is not the case for bumblebees. They only store enough for a couple of days. So again, we're going back to ridiculous characteristics. Honeybee wing is on the left-hand side. They have this little thumb-like projection that's called a jugal lobe on their hind wing. Bumblebees don't have that. So the cool thing about bumblebees is we have 9 species in Texas, but we don't have them all in, I'm assuming, your area of Texas, wherever you're from, because Texas is a huge state. So This is throughout the whole entire state. But the cool thing is you can go to Texas Parks and Wildlife and you can find this key that we're going to actually go through. So when you're identifying bumblebees, the first thing that you want to look at is the thorax and look at the coloration on that thorax. So if you have a yellow thorax or a mostly yellow thorax, then you're going to either have a brown belted, two-spotted, common eastern, or variable cuckoo bumblebee. And then you would be looking at the abdomen and the coloration there, which that one's kind of difficult because they all pretty much look the same. You know, it's like mostly black with a little bit of yellow, but you know, you do what you can. If you have a thorax that has a black stripe going across it, then you get these. So you get black and gold, golden northern, southern plains, Sonoran. And here in central Texas, we get southern plains a lot, we get Sonoran, and then we get the one that I'm going to show you on the next slide. And that would be the American bumblebee. So the American bumblebee is going to have yellow at the front of the thorax, black at the back, and then yellow at the front of the thorax or at the front of the abdomen and black at the back. So this one, pretty common. And oh, here we have buzz pollination. I don't think that it's going to play though. Maybe. Ooh, it will. I'm going to skip just so you can see the actual pollen coming off, because that's the cool part that I wanted you to see.
Pollen is flowing out of the air over the populated and beyond. Approximately 15,000 to 20,000 plant species.
So this is all done by the way that they vibrate their wings.
Enters adapted to buzz pollination. Selection for more efficient mechanisms of pollination on the plant side and selection for less competition for pollen resources on the insect side are likely forces behind the development of these plant morphologies and insect behaviors.
So you see that pollen starting to pop out?
Insects have evolved in such a way as to enhance the effectiveness of the interaction.
And you can see it's just going all over his abdomen. And then once that bee is done, it will sit there and it will groom itself and it crams all that pollen from its body down into those leg areas that it uses to carry the pollen. All right. It doesn't want to go to the next slide. All right. So like I said, bumblebees are social insects and they will create a nest area. So you have your queen bee in the middle. She's the big chunker one that you see. And then you have your worker bees. And if you wrap your brain around that, I mean, we all have an idea of how large bumblebees are, like the workers, because the ones that you're seeing foraging, those are workers. So look at the queen compared to that. I mean, she is like, boom, huge. But when we look at bumblebee nests, these are typically going to occur in cavities. They really like old rodent burrows and other kind of real protected spaces. So, you know, everybody's like, well, how can I get them to come into my yard? I have rats, I guess, maybe. That would work. But these colonies don't get huge. You have anywhere from 50 to several hundred individuals, and the colonies will die off over the winter time. So in the fall, late fall, you will have those females that kind of emerge out. They mate with the males, and then those mated females or the mated queens are the ones that will overwinter. And so those are the ones that we really want to make sure that we're providing shelter for over the winter time, which is extremely important. And that kind of brings me to the next thing. How can we help these animals? Because they are animals and they do need our help as well. And that would be by protecting them, giving them sheltered areas over the winter, leaving leaves, doing something like partially burying a log, maybe leaving some open ground space and not covering everything with plants and mulch. So they have area to create those nursery areas. And like I said, if you are going to do an artificial nursery area for mason bees and leafcutter bees, make sure that you're managing that. The other really important thing is having sources of nectar spring through fall and then providing water when we get into those really hot, dry times of the year. And it's not just, oh, well, I have dogs so they can get it out of the water dish. If you're doing that, go to the dollar store, buy some little bath toys to float in the water dish. That way they have something to grab a hold of and get that water in a safe manner. You can also use like cut up pool noodles. There's all sorts of stuff, but you can also create specific areas for insects to come and get water, because I do that in my yard and it's fun because you get to watch everything. Okay, so resources, if you want a great book, this is a really excellent one. It's called The Bees in Your Backyard, and it is about native bees. Obviously, it's North America, so it's not just Texas, but it has a lot of great information in it. It has like a page or two about honeybees, because that's what everybody thinks of, and it's like, these aren't a native bee, blah, 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 blah. We also have 2 websites. There's Wild Bees Texas. That is, I think, out of South Texas, if I remember correctly. And then we have the Jaw Lab here in UT Austin. They also do information on native bees and a lot of research on them. And then this is my contact information. So if you have questions about bugs, whether that's bees or any other bugs, my background is in structural pest control. So if you have questions on that, shoot me an email. I am more than happy to answer them. I also am happy to talk to groups about bugs. And then if you want even more like bug geeky stuff, you can subscribe to our podcast, which is called Bugs by the Yard. Does anybody have any questions? Sure. So the question was, if you do have a nursery box for the bees, how do you maintain it? So a lot of the information that we have about, or that you find on the internet about mason bees and nursery boxes and stuff is from up north. And so they have this whole big process where you have to take the bees in over the winter and they harvest things and put them in the refrigerator. We don't have to do that. You just leave that stuff outside and they will emerge out in the springtime. Once they emerge out, that's when you need to go in and you need to clean out that space. And depending on what you're doing, and this is why I would encourage, if you're doing a nursery of some sort for bees, making sure that you can open it up and clean that area, or you can even get like a section of PVC pipe, put a cap on one end, and then buy like paper tube kind of straws in there. So when they emerge out, you can just stick a new one in, and then you can throw that in the compost pile. Yes. Yeah. If the question was if they are coming out, they haven't all come out, but they are also going in. That's where you got to be careful about what one you purchase. So if you buy one that is a solid block, that makes it really difficult to manage that. But if you do what I just said with the straws, you can adjust as you need. They also have some that are wooden that have like trays that you can slide in and out. So you can slide out that tray, clean whatever you need to, and slide it back in. So that just takes a little forethought on the front end, and buy the proper thing that's going to work, and it makes your life a lot easier later on. Yeah. Yes. Okay, so the first question is, how do you clean the bee nest box? So if you have something that's permanent, 10% bleach solution and like an old toothbrush or something, and that, just clean it. If bees can't see red, why are they on Turk's cap? When I say that they don't see red, it's like being colorblind. You don't see red. So it's not that it like disappears. They can still see the shape and they can still smell the stuff. They just can't see that color. So they might be attracted to the scent of it as opposed to that actual color. Yes, ma'am. She asked if the Carolina jasmine is poisonous to the native bees, and I do not know that question, to be honest. I have no idea. There were a ton of them out there, so if they're, I would imagine that if it's going to be poisonous to them, that they wouldn't be foraging on it. And there was a crap ton of carpenter bees out there. So I don't know. And I don't know if I'm out of time and I need to stop asking. No, I can do? Okay. Yes. So she asked on the longhorn bee what the function of the clypeus is. All insects have that. It's like a plate on the front of the face. It just looks like somebody like punched him in the face and it boofed out. I'm not sure what morphological function that has being protruding, but there's another order of insects that has that too, and it's weird. Yeah. Okay, see, she asked, what do the overwintering bumblebee queens eat over the winter? They don't. So they are going into a state of dormancy or torpor or whatever you want to call it. So they're like dropping their metabolism down so they don't require food. So the first question there was, how far north are the Mexican honey wasps? And that's a really good question. So y'all that are like further up north, keep an eye out for them and post them on iNaturalist. I know we have them in Williamson County because that's where I live and that's where I took those pictures. So I know they're at least to there, but they might be further north. The other question was, how do they make the bumblebee queen? Do they use royal jelly? That I'm not sure of, but I don't think that they use the royal jelly. I think that it's just like, this is when it's late fall, they have those mated, or the queens emerge out, they mate with the males, and then those are the ones that overwinter. I don't think that they have that whole process like honeybees, but I am not quite sure on that. I would need to check. All right. Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.